here. Welcome to How Good's Innovation Online series. I'm Ethan Soloviev, Chief Innovation Officer at How Good. I'll give you a little overview here. Today we are focusing on building sustainable products, especially from the idea of the essential elements. And I'm so excited to talk with Ali about essential and what that means, really. So we have Ali Bouzari, I hope I got the name right, co-founder and chief science officer at Pilot R&D. We're going to do a brief introduction. We'll dig into the thought leader conversation. Ali and I will talk for 35 minutes or so. We'll do some quick interactive community breakouts so we can get to connect with some of the other great folks who've shown up for the call and also generate some questions. And then we'll come back together for the last 15-20 minutes of the hour to do Q&A. Before we get started, I want to bring your attention to some other upcoming talks in the series. We have a talk on regenerative product incubation and acceleration with Danielle Gould, the brilliant maven behind Food Tech Connect, which is an unbelievable newsletter that just keeps you totally up to date on what's happening in the world of food and the intersection with food and technology. Really great work on biodiversity. We've had her partner in Alpha Food Labs, Mike Lee, on before talking about biodiversity in product design. She's going to be awesome. And then a real kind of stalwart figure in the product development industry, Steve Gundrum, one of the founders of Matson, probably a competitor of Ali's. I don't know, maybe he'll tell us. But just a wonderful guy who's given some input to How Good's platform Lattice, which does sustainability alongside product design. So those are coming up soon. And then also before we kick off, I'll just bring your attention to a working group. How Good does invite-only working groups on various topics. This one is product innovation for impact. This is going to get started later this summer. Nova Sayers on our team is going to be leading it. We have a bunch of great guest speakers, and this is for folks who are really developing products and want to think about how do I do that towards positive impact and learn from each other about what's working, what's not working. So if you're interested in that, please contact Kate. Her email is at the bottom there, and ask for an invitation. Okay, well, now we've got a critical mass here, and so I will stop sharing screen and welcome Ali. Thank you so much for joining us, and maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit and also tell us about Sumac.
Yeah, so hey everybody, this is Ali, like Ali McBeal. So Sumac is good. Ethan, you and I were talking about that before everybody joined on. Ethan asked what the globe was for. I said, it's actually a bar globe. I don't really drink. So my colleagues for my birthday gave me a globe full of Sumac from like six different sources. Because there you go, nerds. You asked about Matson. Frankly, I don't know that we've seen such a thing as competition in this space yet. And that's not like hubris. I mean, literally, there's such an abundance of products that need to get developed and scaled that there's very rarely a bake-off. Like there's so much more work out there than there are product developers that it's never been a problem. So yeah, shout out to Matson for being the OG.
What's the core of product development that you do? Why is it called Pilot R&D? What do you offer to your customers and partners? Give us some insight.
It's called Pilot R&D because naming stuff is hard, and we wanted a thing that sounded sort of correct, and that's pretty much the end of the innovation on the name front. So we're a culinary R&D and scale-up firm. So my co-founders and I, we all come from a weird background where we all started our careers in super high-end fine dining restaurants. So that handful of restaurants around the world that has the budget and the space and the resources for paying people to do research and development on new dishes. We were the ones leading those kitchens, sometimes consulting for those kitchens, sometimes founding programs altogether. Out of that world, we emerged from that world about 7.5 to 8 years ago. We just brought this skill set for ruthless problem solving, is the way we like to describe it. So we were operating in crazy pressure cooker situations on incredibly tight timelines to figure stuff out and make it work. Our team is also I said hybrid, we're also very deeply entrenched in the world of food science. So I have a PhD in food biochemistry. About half our team, we all went to UC Davis for graduate studies in various fields in food science and fermentation and sort of everything between here and there. And what we do is we bring those two things together. The fact of the matter is, in my opinion, food science, like old school food technology, is a profound well of fundamental information that is fundamentally way too unwieldy, way too cumbersome, and way too goddamn slow to get anything done in a modern commercialization kind of format, especially when you're working not with the massive global CPG giants who are still operating on forecasts of what are we gonna do 5 years down the line, or when you're working with startups, mid-sized, and even large national companies that need stuff this year. So what we practice is what we call culinary science, where we understand microbiology and food safety and chemistry and physics and how to make stuff work consistently, safely, and in compliance. But then we also are chefs, and we are good at doing things quickly and cleanly and in an organized, logical, still methodical fashion. But it's applied food science. And so we help our clients not just come up with a flashy thing that tastes really good and unique pairing of flavors from 2 different ideologies or anything like that. We help them create something that is scalable from moment one. So we never have tastings with anything other than samples from scaled ingredient suppliers. We never want our clients to come to us and say, yeah, we love this thing. Where did you get the ingredients? We say the Marin Sunday Farmers Market between June and July and no other time. We want everything to come in, be able to be ordered in pallets or truckloads or drums or totes immediately. We coordinate with co-packers. So we help our clients find the facility where stuff is going to get produced. And we have conversations with the often ornery folk who do that wonderful, noble work to figure out, do they have equipment for pureeing? Are they willing to pump stuff out of totes, or does everything have to come in tankers or dry form? Do they have UHT equipment, or do they only do hot fill? Do they have a tunnel oven, or do they only work with rotating racks? Because what we never want to do is come up with something that is so brilliant that it can never be produced anywhere outside of our brilliant hands. Our test kitchen is a test kitchen. We never call it a food lab. It's a dumb place where dumb food can do its dumb work, and then we can scale it up in a way that is as simple, streamlined, and reasonable as it will be required to be at scale. So that's what Pilot is. That's our ethos. And
awesome.
I truly would love to talk about how dumb food is, because it is way less innovative than software.
I love it. So maybe give us an example or like a flavor, a particular, product that you've developed, just to like, that's innovative, maybe crazy, even, fascinating, but that also brings in the ethos you were just talking about of had to be developed quickly, had to be designed for scale. Just give us a bit of a sense of it.
It's hard to talk specifically about individual projects because there's like snipers outside of my window that will take me out if I violate an NDA. But in broad strokes, I like to talk about crackers. So we work in everything from chocolate to frozen foods to candy bars to crackers and beverages and everything in between. And each category of food has its own nuances, its own hurdles. There's also each category has its own perceived level of difficulty by the people who are trying to bring those products to market. And food is weird because it's not like manufacturing semiconductors, where in food everybody, even people who are by no means employed professionally to handle food, we all have this incredible lifelong track record of hands-on connection to food. And so we all feel, I think rightfully so, that we all have something to say, and we're all a bit of an expert when it comes to food. That is a trap when it comes to bringing a food product to market, because the process of making a batch of sweet potato flour-based crackers in your kitchen is so different from making 100,000 pounds of sweet potato-based crackers in a commercial scale facility that is a big pitfall. People come to us and they're like, it's just a cracker. So $500 and we're good? Can you get this done next week? Absolutely. I won't even charge you to make a batch of sweet potato crackers in an oven and hand it to you. The magic of it all comes from figuring out, okay, the way you've been making your sweet potato cracker is you've been buying sweet potatoes from your local grocery store, baking them, scooping out the insides, smearing them, mixing them with cornstarch or something, and then baking for 45 minutes on a low temperature in your oven until they're a nice cracker. None of what just was described is compatible with scale processing. So there's nobody at scale who's going to scoop the flesh out of sweet potatoes for you. That does not mean that you can't use sweet potatoes and you have to use modified cornstarch and artificial sweet potato flavoring and caramel color. It just means that there are facilities out there, luckily, because in the past 20 years, ingredients have come a long way. You'll actually have your pick of the litter of frozen sweet potato puree, aseptically packaged sweet potato puree, drum-dried, freeze-dried, oven-dried sweet potato powders of various mesh sizes with various particle sizes and various sugar contents and aromas and colors. We'll need to source those, understand, first of all, will the supplier sell it to you a 50-pound sack at a time, or will they require you to order half a truckload? Will they make it to order? And therefore you need to plan to order your sweet potato flour 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time, every time you want to produce crackers? Or is it something that they have on stock and you can get it with a week's notice? Does this sweet potato powder, because at home, you know that you're just scooping it out with a fork and there's nothing else in it. At scale, most ingredient suppliers, if necessary, will add processing aids. So maybe they're adding vitamin C to keep the sweet potatoes from changing color when they dry. Maybe in order to standardize the fact that some sweet potatoes are riper than others, they're adding maltodextrin to make it so that those powders are dried properly every single time. We'll need to make sure that all of that squares with what you want. If you want it organic, is stuff out there organic certified? If you want it non-GMO and kosher, what are the certifying bodies that are doing that? If your product needs to be gluten-free, does it need to be certified gluten-free, or does it need to just not have wheat containing ingredients? So we'll figure out all of that stuff. Then we'll figure out how do these ingredients come together in a way that's scalable. So for a cracker operation, that typically means dump and stir. So if you don't have the ability to roast, mash, and scoop out sweet potatoes yourself, we'll handle that on the ingredient sourcing end. So you can have pre-roasted, scooped, and seasoned sweet potatoes coming into the facility. We'll figure out how to mix them, not by hand, adding a little bit of water at a time, but creating a benchtop recipe that's calculated out to the 100th of a gram, so that when we scale it to a 500 kilo batch, you don't all of a sudden end up with an insane amount of salt because of a rounding error because you were measuring in teaspoons. We'll figure out then, okay, now we're going to bake this product. At home, it totally makes sense. You can sort of nurse and babysit a batch in the oven for 45 to 60 minutes to make sure it doesn't burn. That would cost you probably more than the product is worth at scale if you're trying to sell a bag of sweet potato crackers for $4 a bag. It's probably going to cost you $4 just in oven time if you bake it for that long. So we'll have to figure out, okay, this is going to go into a different type of oven and so on and so forth. Once we get to the co-packer, we have our final formula, we figure out all of this stuff, then we got to burn a bunch of crackers. Commercial scale ovens. So at home, if you're like, all right, I'm going to make a batch of crackers. Ah, man, I burned them. All right, turn the oven down, wait 3 minutes, and then start again. At commercial scale, they typically use tunnel ovens that are 100 feet long and they have a couple different heating zones. And what that means is you have to have 100 feet worth of sweet potato crackers in the oven for the oven to even start to equilibrate. So that means that the first 100 feet of sweet potato crackers are probably going to burn. And then it means that once they start burning and once you figure out, oh, the oven's a little bit too high or too low, you make an adjustment. It's going to take the oven like 15 to 20 minutes to figure out, or not to figure out, it doesn't have a brain, to physically equilibrate back to the temperature setting that you put. So the process of bringing a cracker to market, like the simplest sounding thing possible, requires a lot of organization, a lot of minding your P's and Q's, and a lot of expectations management from the get-go. So one of the things I say a lot is innovation is a really flashy word to throw around, the best things that we can be is thoughtful and organized and pessimistic on your behalf at the beginning of a project, because the ability to tell you the problems that you may encounter down the road, we have found is the most compelling thing that we have, even after years and years of telling people about all the flashy stuff we can do.
Right.
Most people are more interested in what we can't do.
Right. You bring the restraint that helps actually form the boundaries by which good creative things can happen.
Exactly.
So is sweet potatoes one of the, you talk about 8 essential ingredients. Is sweet potato one, or also I'll link it to a question that came in on the chat. Somebody was talking about kelp and sugar kelp in particular, which is amazing. I actually had sugar kelp and salt together on my eggs this morning. It's a beautiful ingredient. Is that one of the essential ingredients? What are the 8 essential ingredients, and how do you sort of think about them in your process of restrained innovation?
Yeah, the 8 essential ingredients that I try to redefine with like a capital I are not the things you're used to in a kitchen, like sugar kelp or eggs or potatoes. They're the things, the building blocks that all of those ingredients are made from. So lipids, carbohydrates, complex carbs, sugars, proteins, minerals, that kind of thing. And the reason that we talk a lot about those is, like, if you watch food competition shows like Top Chef, there's always an episode where they hand somebody some crazy root that they've never seen before, or some rare species of sea snail that they've never cooked with. And they're like, I don't know, I've never cooked with this before. The cool thing is everything on Earth, everything that is edible by human beings is made of that same basic alphabet of building blocks. And while you could spend a lifetime understanding all the nuances between asparagus and Szechuan peppercorns and gooey duck and sugar kelp, it doesn't take nearly as long to memorize the patterns of what sugar does, of what proteins do, of what minerals do, and all of these different things. And so people ask us a lot, like, are you guys experts in beverage formulation? I'm like, yes, and all other things where the purpose is human enjoyment, which is sometimes met with skepticism, because that has traditionally been the thing. You stay in your silo. I'm a cracker expert, I'm a peanut expert, I'm a soda expert. We try to think about food a little bit more broadly, and with no less rigor, but thinking about proteins are going to do protein stuff. If you have something that is causing bitterness, it's 50-50 chance of being protein related. If you have something that is starting to smell bad in a certain time frame, we can Sherlock Holmes our way to knowing that it's probably something to do with fat, and we need to protect that fat in different ways. And so it can be a really sturdy platform. It can be a great way to shortcut a bunch of trial and error. The ingredient capital I mindset is kind of what's underneath everything that we do.
It kind of deflates my next question, which was going to be about like ingredient trends and sort of what you're seeing out there in the marketplace, what's hot. You know, we've heard a lot in this series about biodiversity and, you know, people reconnecting with foods that are usually their ancestral foods to somewhere, to some peoples in some place over time. Last time we talked with Chef Pierre Thiam from Yolele, and we're looking at fonio. We also talked, you know, previously about less common grains, millets and amaranths and quinoas, and also, you know, different spices from different places. So I'm just curious, what are you seeing is like trending, both from the level I'm asking it from, but then also from your level of, you know, 8 essential building block ingredients?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely trends on both of those strata. Adaptogens, I don't know, that the food that is also working for you. We internally, we call it the Nike pumps era of food, where it's like, you can't just wear shoes, they have to like inflate and make you jump higher and run faster and all these things. The functional food trend is, I think, the thing we've seen permeate everything. So the number of things we put ashwagandha and turmeric into is at this point staggering. I would say that side of things is very big. I would love to see more interest in biodiversity. I think there are a few projects that we hear about, maybe 1 out of 10 right now, which is more than, I would say, 1 out of 30 a few years ago, are focused on regenerative agriculture or things that are more sustainable minded. A lot of that is in there. I think people are getting more into fermented foods on the commercial side. which for the record, fermenting food at scale is something for which at least the commercial co-packing industry in the United States is very poorly equipped to handle. If it's not beer, wine, dairy, the things that we've been fermenting skillfully in this country for a long time. So all of the pickling, long aging, fermenting, that stuff is no less scalable. I want to say that like full stop. If the infrastructure were there, it would be so much easier to do. It's just that the infrastructure is just getting built now to do fermented foods. So that one, it meets a little bit more friction, but fermented foods is a huge trend that we're hearing about. Plant-based, and obviously everybody's looking to make a plant alternative to a favorite animal-based food. So I would say all of those things on the surface, lowercase I ingredient level, on the beneath the surface, the uppercase ingredient, protein has been the thing we've talked about for the past 10 years. Interestingly, we're hearing more and more that our obsession with protein is moderating a little bit. And some of the arms race approach to nutrition labels is starting to get a little bit more reasonable. So now when somebody says they want to make a protein bar, I would say in 2015, that conversation always started with, and here's why we need to go above 20 grams of protein per bar. Now it's like, we're okay with 7 grams of protein. We would just rather have that protein come from this ancestral grain, or we want it to come from only whole food, minimally processed sources. Now we have to talk about what processing means to that particular client, and that whole thing. But I think that people are still wanting to make protein claims on their product, but they're being more moderate about it, more balanced with other things that matter, not just, we'll put razor blades into the food as long as it's got a good dose of protein. For the record, we never did that. I think that's a big one. This is maybe just a troll take, but I have been waiting for good sugar to come back. Just like we have now, it's not a weird thing to say of like good fats. In the 90s, like I remember looking at my parents at a restaurant, like considering ordering fettuccine Alfredo and hearing the phrase heart attack on a plate. Like nobody has talked about that since the 90s. And we're now fully in the land of good fats. I wonder if we're starting to taper off from peak sugar anxiety and start getting more into, no, this beverage mix is a great source of good sugars from virgin honeysuckle tears or whatever it will be. I wonder if that's coming next, but we haven't seen it officially.
That would be amazing. I mean, I personally don't eat cane sugar, but I eat tons of maple sugar, from our farm, from honey from our bees, and I feel like
maybe it's already here.
Well, I don't know. I live in a little regenerative farm in upstate New York, but I think but I love sugar. And to your point of making things delicious, like what does that look like? And when I saw the first chocolate bar at scale, Rocca chocolate, that is fully sweetened with maple. And it's amazing. It's the best thing. I buy it. It's extremely expensive, and I buy tons of it. So it's very
wildly
interesting.
Expensive.
Yeah,
6 times more expensive than cane sugar, I think.
Yeah, because it's really hard to make, but delicious. And so I love that idea of peak sugar. Let me challenge or just test a little. I still feel like a lot of people are scared about fat. Are we really in that, the era of good fat? Is that, or are you even in your position a little ahead of the curve because you're innovating, you're seeing what's next, and for you it's here? And does that mean that that is actually coming, and we will see it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I fully cop to being in a bubble. Like the startup food entrepreneur sphere is probably the bubbliest of all bubbles we've ever seen. But at least they have to at some point interact with mainstream consumer culture. So it's maybe not quite as isolated as it could be. But I would say that even in products that are going into major chain grocery stores, conventional, not the natural organic channels only, we hear more and more people saying, we definitely don't want a lot of sugar. We would love to keep our ingredient list as clean as possible. We want it to be delicious. So while we want to pursue as much protein as possible, fat isn't the end of the world. If fat helps us make this thing gluten-free, or if fat helps us make this thing stabilizer-free, because instead of using gel and gum to thicken a beverage, we want to use the avocado oil or something like that. So yeah, I would say we're a few years in, at least from the standpoint we have, to maybe not everything is keto, everything is the fat is the point, but we're definitely at a juncture here where fat is a easily toggleable lever in order to achieve all the other stuff. It's no longer like hot button, off limits, make or break kind of piece of the puzzle.
Can you talk a little bit about nutrition? And this is a good question that came in on the chat from Soma here. Just like nutrition and nutritional value of foods processed at scale. Of course, what I make in my kitchen, I'm going to be, I picked the asparagus from my garden this morning. I'm going to have it the freshest with the most enzymes, the most nutrients in it when I cook in my kitchen. Are we necessarily going to lose some of that nutrition when we go to scale, or are there ways to preserve it? Are you seeing that important to, your customers in the industry? Love your thoughts on that.
It depends so much. So first of all, my blanket disclaimer is that neither I nor any of my colleagues are nutritionists, and we're thrilled about that fact because nutrition is wild complicated. We are experts in the physics and biochemistry of what makes food good, what makes food have texture and flavor and all these things. Whether or not you should consume 10 or 20 grams of protein in a serving, or whether or not this unsaturated fat is better for you than that one, or whether or not cane sugar is going to be processed by your body differently than honey, that's not for us to say. We are vessels who help interpret the wants and needs of people who want to make food a certain way, explain to them when they might be trying to do something that's physically impossible, and then help make the best food possible within that sandbox. But I think in general, the notion that large scale produced food is inherently necessarily worse or better for you is flawed, and the dialogue around it is informed by what has been done, not what could be done. So what I mean by that is anybody who looks at all the food products created between 1950 and 1995, probably rightfully so, has a pretty fearful, anxious perspective on, man, that's a lot of modified starch, that's a lot of completely stripped down simple sugars, that's a lot of colors and things like that. For what it's worth, when most modern product developers look at those labels, we're also like, do you really need all this stuff? And the answer I think is when you make a Dorito, you're not talking about ordering a truckload of corn at a time. You're talking about building grain silos to house your corn. When you look at the industrial food that we all grew up eating, and that was the first wave of what that could be, those were like the mythological titans. They were like before the gods came. When you think of something like a Kind Bar, or I don't know, whatever your favorite oat milk brand is or whatever, those are such small fries compared to everything that happened in the decades before. And that stratospheric scale is something that requires ultimate control and precision. And especially for the way that the consumers in the mid to late 1900s were looking. People thought a tomato should be perfect and round. People thought that butter should always melt the exact same way. People thought that every saltine cracker should have the exact same angle. The modern consumer is more flexible and fuzzy with their demands for perfection. And so food has been able to fit into that a little bit more. And a little bit more leeway means a lot more leeway on the ingredient side of things. So when we truly in 7 years plus of doing several dozen food projects a year, to date, we have never had to use sodium benzoate in a product, which is preservative in sriracha and a lot of old school condiments and things that keep stuff from growing. It's not that we're opposed to it. It's that it's never been asked. We have used artificial flavors. I'm gonna make a number up and say we've done 200 projects. I think we've used artificial flavors twice. Again, not because I don't think artificial clove aroma is going to harm you. I'm completely agnostic on that front. It's just we haven't had people interested in it. We have been using sweet potato flour and millet and rosemary extract and lemon juice in like every project we've done. I think that the average bar for nutritional value has gone up so much that I think it has to be on a different scale than everything that was developed before 2000, because it's like the internet was created all of a sudden for food. It's that much of a change. When you think about like the dialogue around social justice issues in the 80s versus in the spring of 2021, right? It's the same sort of thing. The number of food products that have come up since New Year's of this year is probably equivalent to the 1970s. So I think we've had a fracturing of that like monocultural. There's only one Twinkie. Now there's, if you want a creamy, gluten-free product that's made with fair trade Kernza flour, there's probably 3 options. You know what I mean? Like there's just so many more possibilities now that I think the old, more monolithic conversations around is industrial food good or bad for you? It's almost impossible to say yes or no to that as a binary because so many options.
Right.
Yeah.
What are some things, so, I mean, what are some things you've had to, in gaining the expertise that you have now and gaining the sort of depth of experience, what are some things that you've had to give up or sort of unlearn or like throw out, things that you believed early on in your journey as a culinary scientist and product developer? What are some things that now you look back and you're like, nope, I had to let go of that, or that totally evolved so much it's not recognizable anymore?
I think this is not particular to us, but I think the main thing that people have to unlearn whenever entering producing products at scale is maybe not unlearn, but maybe focus in on a little bit more, is how intelligent and how much human hands and human oversight can spackle over problems in a recipe. Like imagine the simplest recipe you can think of, scrambling an egg, right? We're not even going to salt the egg. We're just fresh nonstick pan. You don't even need fat. It's fairly straightforward for me to walk through, like get on Zoom with an alien who's never scrambled an egg or seen the process, talk them through the process and do it okay. That is because even though that person has no context for what scrambling an egg should look like, they still have all of these little micro judgments that they're able to make, hearing what it should be live and having me able to troubleshoot for them. When you're doing stuff at scale, a lot of times, even if it's making a cracker, I'm not talking about like whatever people's concept of frankenfood is. I'm talking about like rolling out a cracker dough exactly the way you've had it. A tiny little proclivity towards tearing in the dough. If the dough tears every once in a while and you're rolling it on a board and you just fold it over and roll it again, that is a no-go. That is like the whole day is shot at a production facility, because that tear means that the whole rolled out sheet of cracker dough will tear and literally fall between the cracks from transfer belt to transfer belt. And you won't have product even make it to the oven if that tear continues. So that is a huge thing that people need to unlearn, and that we had to unlearn, anybody coming into this world, is that it doesn't matter how easy it feels to make something with your own hands. We all tragically undervalue the incredible computing power and engineering power that this and this has, because once you have to pull that out of the equation and just allow stuff to run steady state by itself, you're like, oh my gosh, 0.1% of water would screw this whole thing up. Whereas you don't even have to measure water when you're doing it by hand. You can just add more flour. You can figure things out on the fly. The other thing that is something we specifically have really learned and internalized is we can do a ton of innovative stuff, but none of our innovative intentions matter at all if supply chain is not going to comply. So we have one of my colleagues, her name's Jen Burns. She's our relationship manager at Pilot, and she heads up sourcing. Every project that we do, regardless of the category, starts with her and people from the rest of the Pilot team contacting ingredient suppliers and saying, hey, we have this amazing idea to make a fennel bulb milk. We figured out the ultimate flavor technology to make to milk and make fennel bulbs delicious. It's better than dairy milk. You'll never believe it. That entire innovation, even if we have the technique already set by, will be completely cut at the knees if IQF organic fennel, or whatever the specific spec of the thing that needs to be plugged in this process, doesn't exist. It can exist, and it may exist in a year or two, but for a new ingredient to come on the market, it requires a ton of volume, a ton of money, and a ton of time. And so that the supply chain side of things has probably as much sway in how we innovate and what we make as any idea that a food developer could have. So that's a huge one.
It's very interesting, and it sets up a sort of inertia where a lot of what we work on at How Good and work with our partners on is transforming the food system towards some of what you were talking about, regenerative agriculture, biodiversity, but it sets up this very significant infrastructure, material capital inertia from the supply chain side of what what becomes possible. So that's fascinating to hear. In a minute here, we're going to do breakouts. So you're going to show up, everybody's going to show up in a room with a couple other people, say hello, tell them the most exciting thing that you've heard from Ali so far, and then think of any particular questions or things in specific you want to ask him. I know I have a question about artificial intelligence that we'll pick up when we get back, and there's a couple other questions coming in the chat. So I'll see you in just a couple minutes, probably 4 or 5 minutes. We'll see you back here to do Q&A with Ali. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for chatting with some folks. There's a first question that came in the chat just before we left, but other folks, get your questions in. Hi, Michael, good to see you here. It'd be great, if anybody has questions you want to pop in for Ali, please drop them in the chat, or you can put your hand up and maybe we'll come off mute. But the first one was, where was it there? Coming from Anissa. What's happening regarding food waste, food byproducts, upcycled food? Is that one of the trends that you're seeing? Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Yes, just yes to all of it. It's a huge trend that we're seeing. Frankly, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I think educating people on how to not throw food out in their own homes is super helpful. But I mean, if you want to make a giant dent immediately, take artichoke fibers and turn them into crackers and stuff like that. There is no shortage of possibility and practical applications. Like, that's the cool thing, is food waste inherently has a ton of value. We can take all of those burnt sweet potato crackers I just made up before, and we can turn those into like a really cool spice rub for barbecue. Like, that would totally happen. The hurdle that there's not good infrastructure for yet is in the scaled food world, everything has to be super documented. So when we order sweet potato powder, it's going to come with a statement on heavy metal content. It's going to come with a kosher certificate. It's going to come with a certificate of analysis that shows that this lot of sweet potato powder tested negative for listeria and salmonella, and here was its total yeast count and all these things. If you're like a small cracker company that wants to make a difference and you want to like sell a spice company all your burnt crackers, you then also have to become an ingredient company, which the documentation and the certification and the FDA compliance of that is sticky, and it's difficult. So it's something that we've seen happen. I mean, we actually 2 years ago we did a run of our own product that was using upcycled whey in a beverage, and I can tell you that's the hardest thing we've ever done. Figuring out how to transport whey from A to B without being a dairy ourselves, getting the proper certificates on file. All of that stuff is black belt level degree of difficulty from the logistics perspective. Making the food good and making it even work with scaled manufacturing is very feasible. So I have a feeling it's going to happen. It would be super helpful if there were government or non-government organizations that could help supply the necessary logistics support for making that happen. Because, like, again, even Kind Bar, massive company, I'm pretty sure they don't have the wherewithal to like take all their broken bars, generate a certificate of analysis, and then like sell it to an ice cream company for inclusions. I think that would like take a massive amount of effort that a lot of food companies are too busy minding their own razor thin margins to deal with right now. But absolutely possible, and it's almost certain that it will happen.
Definitely. Okay, great. Question from Lisa here about if pilot R&D necessarily requires sustainability as part of your work, or is it something that you do and are happy to do when asked? And how much, you said maybe 1 in 10 are pulling that sort of ingredient, but you also said in general you're seeing more of a trend in this direction. So
Yeah,
what's your kind of approach? And this question also connects to the kind of theory of change question I was asking you in the break of
yeah.
like, how do we shift the whole food systems towards a more sustainable, even beyond to regenerative, given the inertia that we're seeing?
It's a good question. I would say that in general, the ethos and the claims always come from our client. So I will say that the number of times we've had to say no to a client who is just like transparently, abjectly evil is very small. um, like it's only been a couple times. Most most new food product companies, whether it's because of cynical marketing reasons or because of like a true believer nature, they're all reading the writing on the wall that this is something that consumers care about. So at the very least, people are going to try to say this is grass-fed X, Y, or Z, or this is um, upcycled something, or at the very least, people are starting to try to make these claims. I will say that every single food company out there has their own tribal ethos. In a single day, we'll start work on a product that's all about grain-free because they think grains are the enemy. We'll finish the day working on ancient grains because they think that ancient grains are our savior. So it's tough to pick a side. So I will say that we'll work with just about any matrix of products. But yes, overall, the vast majority of momentum is towards building in some message about how your product is doing something for the greater good, whether that's fair trade or regenerative agriculture or plant-based itself seems to be a claim that people feel moves in the right direction enough. But that all comes from our clients.
Interesting question here from Michael about, we've hit a bunch on trends here. He's curious about trends in the context of shorter term, as in like, this is something that's here and will be gone in a few years, versus the longer term, the more sort of eras of trends. And if you have any, viewpoint on, you looking back, you're able to see that, but looking forward, how do you get an eye on
that? That's another one where thankfully we're not as much on the hook for it, and we're very transparent with our clients of like, we don't do consumer research. Our expertise is on the food itself. So if you want to make a thing that hits every buzzword that appeared in Bon Appetit's things to watch in summer of 2021, we're happy to do so. We want to make clear that we don't know that that's the thing America wants. This is the thing you've asked for and we've made delicious and scalable. The thing that America or Europe or whatever market you're trying to hit is interested in is a completely different conversation. But I would say in general, we as a fly on the wall, we notice a lot of these things come and go. I think that there are certain ingredient trends that emerge and disappear. Like I don't know how much the turmeric market can continue being saturated, especially like that's an ingredient that isn't actually ever going to go anywhere. It's just a like fundamental spice that's always going to be in things, in what everybody eats. Whether or not it's going to be overdose, everything is bright gold 10 years from now, I don't know. In general, people are going to want to understand what their food is made of. I think that is never going away. The exact form of how it looks will change. Like I think this is a perfect example. Macro trend or macro pattern that's a paradigm shift that's not going to be undone. People want to know what their food is made of. We've exited Eden. We now know. Micro version of that. I don't know if people are going to remain scared of xanthan gum. Like, I think people are going to maybe 5 years from now take stock and be like, all right, it's basically fiber. It's a small amount of what we're consuming. And I would rather have xanthan gum in my product than hydrogenated soybean oil or whatever. I think that the particular ingredients that are on the no list will come and go. Whereas the presence of a no list is never going away.
Got Question from Leah here, building on your discussion of difficulties when it comes to documentation at scale, do you think blockchain has a role to play here? Is this actually will it show up and grow and scale quick enough that it'll help with the traceability documentation of ingredients going forward?
I hope so. I have little to no idea how blockchain actually works. So the computer science part of it, I will reserve judgment. But the traceability of this kind of thing is really, really important. Though for what it's worth, it's not something we've seen big issues with. For most of the clients we're working with, they're not like working with giant shadow corporations and they're not sure exactly where their peppers came from. They're working with like a farm in Ohio, or a farm in Peru, or a farm in Canada, and they have a pretty transparent process already. I think maybe for the Doritos of the world, where your ingredients may have come from every hemisphere and like passed through 17 different middle people to get to you, I think that's where it becomes a lot more important. I don't think that like your new favorite brown butter chocolate chip cookie that you get at the grocery store is necessarily going to need to leverage that and the cost associated for at least a while.
How about in the same realm of sort of the tech food interface? Isn't AI getting like really smart now, and won't they just replace you and your creativity with a AI neural network that can just read a million different variables and understand the market, and then don't they have robotic things now that they'll just be doing, like, is this coming, and or could you see how you might use some forms of AI to empower what you're doing?
Using AI in a commercial setting to like better sort a burnt cracker from a not one would be super helpful, and I think would be a practical application. Using AI to basically put this is kind of ironic, but some of the human hands back in a mechanized process, that would be amazing. And I think that would help people produce better food more flexibly, which is what a lot of these sustainability initiatives need. Now, I don't know how that works with like jobs, but not my area of expertise. AI, like Watson doing flavor pairings and stuff, is a very cool party trick. I think that my requisite bold hot take for the day, I think you will have AI more quickly make inroads with like being a like relationship partner for you than you will for it understanding how you eat a mango. I say this a lot, but the amount of sensory data and emotional baggage and cognitive like connective tissue that goes into just perceiving flavor in your brain is among the most complex things that our brains do. And AIing that to a way that actually adds value beyond just giving somebody a slice of pizza and being like, is this good? And having them give you a quick, cheap answer. That I think is farther away. So in terms of AI, like changing what foods go together or how we eat or how we judge flavor, way far off. AI just being put in as like a smart QA bot to help supplement what scaled food processing needs. Brilliant. Let's do it now.
Awesome. Okay, unless there's any last questions for Ali from the crowd, I'll ask basically, yeah, how do you want to bring this to completion? What's next for you? What do you want us to know? What could help us help you make more amazing food? How do you want to kind of wrap this up and send us out of here?
A thing that I want to keep saying as much as possible is, I mean, especially when we're talking about plant-based and moving forward with sustainability and entering the third, fourth, fifth wave, whatever this is, of the scaled food industry. I am really excited for all of the plant-based animal analogs to complete their mission. I'm so excited for there to be a day when you can go and you can get a satisfactory plant-based burger, egg, cheese, milk, whatever. I want all of those missions completed so that then we can use some of those resources to make plants plenty. I use the analogy a lot of plants are just chemically more complex and interesting from a flavor perspective than animals. They communicate with aromas and colors and taste molecules, and animals can yell at you. So disassembling a potato to make it into a cow is like stripping a Ferrari for parts to make a lawnmower. And that's still stupid hard. I could not do that. That is like among the most impressive food engineering things we've ever done. But I hope that all of these companies sort of achieve hegemony. It happens, it's there, the need is met, so that the next wave can be, look at an eggplant, allowing eggplants to do eggplant stuff. What's all the cool snacks and beverages and things we can make around that? Because that's where all the culinary innovation is in restaurants. Chefs been doing crazy stuff with carrots for like 15 years that nobody's even cracked into on the scaled food side, and it's delicious. And so I think that's not meant to replace all the plant-based animal analogs or cast any aspersions there at all. Just I think the next step that we all need to take is getting people excited about plants, not in costume.
Yeah, it's like going back to the essence of the plants themselves. One last great question from Soma here. What's your favorite product that you've created that you can talk about, and why?
There's one that's been a lot in the press recently. It's a candy bar called Gigantic. It's a good friend of ours named Stu Davidoff. He came to us and said, I want a candy bar with like a reasonable amount of sugar. I'm not willing to like turn it into Frankenfood in order for them to be no sugar and pretend that there's nothing here. But if it could have like 6 or 7 grams of sugar instead of 30 and kind of be like a Snickersy type candy bar, I would love to do that. So we made a candy bar, and it's been written up in all the food magazines and stuff. And it's really delicious and legitimately a thing I will eat, because I like caramel and nuts and chocolate and roving and all these things, but I'm not about to just like pound a Milky Way on my way to work. So I would say it's the product that has most like fit into my soul of a reasonable balance of one step forward without trying to make unicorn food.
Can't wait to get to eat with you somewhere someday and try that candy bar alongside the eggplant creation that you make.
Yes.
Thank you, Ali, for being here and joining us. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you all in the next one. Cheers.
Thanks.